So thanks everyone for joining us today. We're here as part of the Berlin TV series Talks, which is a side wing project of the Berlin Series TV Festival, which is happening in June. Today, we're very grateful to be joined by Aron Levitz, who's president of Wattpad WEBTOON Studios. What Aron does at Wattpad WEBTOON Studios is lead a team of global entertainment and publishing experts who create data-backed, fan-driven hit TV shows and books. We're going to talk much more in detail about WEBTOON and Wattpad, but viewers around the world will have heard of the huge hits of digital comics that they publish on their platforms, such as Hellbound and All of Us Are Dead, as well as user-generated titles from Wattpad, which includes other huge hits such as The Kissing Booth, which was a big breakthrough young adult title. Okay, so without further ado, I'm going to just say hi to Aron and just crack on with some questions.
Awesome. Let's do it.
Let's do it. So Aron, could you just tell us a bit about, what WEBTOON is, what digital comics are, just for the uninitiated to have a feel of what's going on with them?
One of my favorite topics is comics ever since I was 8 years old. So love that I get to talk about it with everyone watching. And again, thanks for having me on. Digital comics is an interesting term because it means a lot of things to a lot of different people. So, when one way to think about digital comics is the comics we all read as kids in book form or floppy form, putting them on a device, putting them on a screen. And there's lots of platforms who've done that, have taken your favorite Marvel or DC comic and put it on a screen. That is just taking like the physical form that we're all used to and giving us a way to read it kind of on the move without having to carry that physical form with us. When we talk about what we're doing with WEBTOON, and WEBTOON's, started back in 2004, really helped pioneer this space, is a truly digital first comic, a comic that is read with a vertical scroll, that is meant to be read on your mobile device while you're on the move. And really, as we started, WEBTOON helped to really change this from something that was read in one or two places to something that's now being read around the world. And as you mentioned, things like Sweet Home, things like Hellbound, things like All of Us Are Dead are not just being enjoyed in its vertical scrolling form on your phone or your device anymore, it was also being enjoyed on screens all over the world. On top of that, even on the studio, we announced one of our imprints, WEBTOON Unscrollable, will be bringing those stories to shelves all over the world, as well as graphic novels. So putting it back into a physical form. So really, we're talking about something that, as I said, started in Korea in 2004, really because the Korean comic industry had really waned. The Japanese comic industry had taken over, the manga industry had taken over. But with the launch of WEBTOONs, we saw this rise of manga all over again, and really becoming one of the key storytelling methods, not just in that country, but all over the world now.
Yeah, it's a fascinating sort of development of the comic form, isn't it? It's like, it's almost, I'm some of my generation who wasn't familiar with it at all, but it's like people make these beautiful illustrations and they're very ingenuitively converted into this sort of, it's not like a graphic novel where you, like you say, you read from side to side and it's basically a book. It's a whole new form, isn't it? But it's really captured generations of their passion, right?
Yeah, it really is a different experience than reading that panel by panel. Okay, this page is a big panel, and then there's three. It's just a completely different experience, and it's also a different experience for creators. First of all, much more accessible to creators. Anyone can start drawing and creating a WEBTOON on our Canvas platform. Anyway, if you have an idea, to bring it. Let's see you start drawing it. I don't know if you can draw, but we'll bring it. And anyone has a chance to kind of rise with telling an interesting and different story. And that's one of the things we pride ourselves in. Our creators come from all over the world, from all sorts of backgrounds, countries, having all sorts of ideas and all sorts of genres they're bringing, and being able to see those come to the top because audiences fall in love with them naturally is just a really important part of what we do. But that vertical scrolling also allows for really different kinds of storytelling. And if you get into something like Lore Olympus and just watch how Rachel Smythe, and Lore Olympus is, you know, one of our biggest stories, things have about 1.2 billion views on the platform. Just the way that Rachel's able to tell stories in that vertical scrolling method, the way she's able to create cliffhangers. You know, if you're on that big open page, you can always kind of in the corner of your eye see what's happening, maybe a page over. With this one, you know, it really is almost a little more like a TV experience. Like you only see what the filmmaker or showrunner is going to show you next. You can guess what's going to happen at the end, but you are limited. And it really has let our creators kind of expand their wings and tell stories in ways I don't think are possible in traditional comic storytelling. And you say it's taken over some generations, but I think what we're seeing is that the storytelling that's being told on these platforms, and Wattpad's no different, is really reaching that aforementioned 4-quadrant kind of storytelling where, yeah, it may start in a place that you didn't know existed until you listened to me talk about it. But now that you know All of Us Are Dead came from Webtoon, go back and read it on there, get that different experience, explore different corners of that universe. And so we're really excited to see the growth that we've seen globally on Webtoon, of course, on Wattpad as well.
Yeah, it sounds a bit like when I grew up, you know, initially graphic novels were this kind of, they could never be as considered as literary as novels. But then like 10 or so years later, now they win awards, and they're you know, it seems we're on a similar trajectory with digital comics. It's just the, you know, if not, we're all, it's one of those elephant in the room things. I mean, I understand you've got a crazy amount of projects in development now. They're all on the biggest streamers. They've all got them, yet they're still like, if you say, have you read a digital comic to someone in their sort of late 30s or 40s, they may not actually know what you're talking about. You know.
But that's changing quickly, I think. I mean, you know, I think you bring up graphic novels as like a really good evolution, right? Graphic novels was seen as a genre.
Yes.
Now we know it's just a medium, right? We can tell action stories, we can tell romance stories. We can tell history that way, or we can tell philosophy that way. And when it used to be the graphic novels were that kind of relegated to like the back corner, they're now at the front of every bookstore globally. And digital comics are that same thing. Webtoon is definitely that same thing. It's not a genre, right? We're not just telling action stories, and we have phenomenal action stories, things like Tower of God, which, you know, we just announced actually that we're just did the cover release for the graphic novel that we're printing. But we also have wonderful romance stories, great slice of life stories. If you want monsters, we have them. But if you just want to, you know, have a little laugh, we have humor. And so as people, I think, experience their first Webtoon, and whether they're coming in through, you know, something they saw on Netflix, like we said, like Hellbound, or whether they're finding their own thing with something like Third Shift Society, they'll realize that it's just a very immersive way to hear that story. And then the community that builds around it. And this is the thing that graphic novels don't have, right? You buy your graphic novel off the shelf and your experience ends there, unless you dive into the internet and try to find a community around it. The community is built into every story we tell. At the end of every chapter, you're seeing what other audience members are commenting. You're following a lot. In fact, those comments can be just as addicting as the story themselves to see how your peers are reading this and reacting. So I think as people go test it and start reading it, you're going to realize it really is this immersive, connective, engaging storytelling that just isn't being told in other places. And I think that's what's led to the growth from 2004 to the 82 million users we have on Webtoon around the world every month today. And
did it, I may have misunderstood this, but did it all come from South Korea, or is that a misconception?
Yeah, Webtoon started in South Korea, started under the company Naver by our CEO, Jung-Gu Kim, and grew from there. And really, he just wanted to read more comics. Like, he's just a pure lover of them and wanted to see that in a mobile form, be able to see more of it in Korea. As I said, the Japanese
Yes.
industry had really taken over and gave this really beautiful way for new creators to start telling their story.
And digital comics themselves, did they have a point of origin, or is it too hard to sort of?
I mean, it's really hard to tell. I think, going back to the earliest moments we all got on the internet, there was a comic somewhere that we could read. But I think when you're talking about pioneering, what we see as digital comics today, which is that vertical scrolling comic, really Webtoon is a place you can start looking at the origins. Okay.
And just, I kind of know the answer to this already, but are these comics consumed globally by generations, or is it Europe specific, more Asia specific, or North American, or anything like that?
It is really just a massively growing art form around the world. So, we have 50 million users in the US, for example. We have users all across Europe, Latin America. Spanish is a really important language for the platform. Obviously huge across all parts of Asia.
Yes.
And I think, and just to bring in the Wattpad side, I think that was one of the great things about bringing both the platforms together is we both have a global view of how we can drive storytelling through understanding audience and diverse creators from around the world. And so I think the power of storytelling, you mentioned something like a Hellbound, but, even from the Wattpad side, Atravest of Montana, which, is a Spanish film that we produced that hit the top of the charts all over the world on Netflix. One of the powers of this studio now is that we know that local storytelling can be a global hit no matter where it started. And so the power of the platforms growing all over the world just means we'll see more on screens and shelves all over the world as well. And
just so everyone watching is clear, Wattpad, whereas Webtoon is digital comics, Wattpad is user-generated, like literature, books. It's a book, essentially a prose publishing platform, correct? Like the big,
exactly.
A lot of people will be familiar with The Kissing Booth, because that was the producers could see it was a hugely successful in terms of views for what was published on Wattpad. Therefore, that was a great thing to take to platforms. So look how much engagement there is with this. How much interaction is there with this compared to a traditional publisher. Clearly you can see you've got a reader base there, and so this is why there's that cool synergy between Webtoons and Wattpad, because they're similar beasts, but with a sort of, one is more visual, one's more literature.
Perfectly said. If Webtoon is to comic and change that art form into something that was engaging, creator driven, but audience and fandom creating, Wattpad did the same thing for the written word.
Yeah.
So here we have a company that started back in 2009. I started there in 2013, and has grown to be 94 million users around the world coming to read, share, and tell their stories. And much like I made that graphic novel analogy earlier, where you buy a graphic novel and that's kind of the end of your experience. That's what books are. It's a transaction, right? You grab a book off the shelf, maybe you go on a platform to leave a review, but that's like for the super fans. That is not what Wattpad is, right? A writer writes one chapter, and most of our big stories have been serialized over sometimes years. And in those moments of serialization between the next chapter coming up, the community really engages. They start asking questions. You're watching the fandom grow in front of your eyes. And, we look at some of our biggest hits, like the After film franchise. Anna Todd started writing this story and now has, over 1 billion reads on the platform, sold tens of millions of books around the world. There's a 4-film franchise, and we actually just released the graphic novel. And that's all on the basis of the fandom she created. And you asked about the similarities, but one of the things when we brought the two platforms together, as we merged and were acquired last year on the Wattpad side, is that we both just have the same kind of ethos, which is, let's find the best creators. Let's find them through the audience and fandom they create. And if we listen to that fandom and audience, we're going to find new voices all over the world constantly. So very analogous in, if Webtoon is to comics, Wattpad is to books. But on the other side, they're so far away from the creative mediums that that inspired them.
Yes.
It's just such a much more three-dimensional experience on both of them, which is why as a studio, we get to kind of listen to those audiences and find the stories that people are already in love with.
And I love the way that writers can sort of prove themselves as they go. So, you know, like they can do one chapter, if that gets some engagement, then it gets a bit of word of mouth, then you get more chapters. Suddenly it's a totally new way of not only finding talent, but also finding the marketability at the same time as something that's, you know, just clearly wasn't available to the publishing world previously. It was all down to agents, editors, an eye for what the market wants, whereas this is a very interesting, entirely new sort of industry upending way of finding the next generation of writers.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a lot you touched on there. You know, first of all, let's go back to the old system, which was gatekept by agents and editors, by creative execs in the TV and film industries. Now we have a way for someone to tell a story that doesn't fit into the mold of the stories that we've all heard for the last 100 years. I mean, storytelling, its evolution has grown, but when you start looking at the stories being told on our platforms, you see where storytelling can go for the next 100 years. Yeah. And with no one telling, you know, a young woman in Germany what she can and can't write, she'll write the story she doesn't see on the shelves. She writes a story because she doesn't see herself represented. And that allows a story that would never have been told in the traditional system. But the other thing it does, to your point, it's a lot more accessible. I mean, for every one of our friends listening who says, I'm going to write a book, the idea of writing an entire manuscript before you know you've got something, only to find out you do or don't, is a huge burden. The idea to be able to draw a few frames or create a few chapters, so much more accessible for the creator community, which has allowed us to grow to millions of creators around the world.
Yeah, I mean, this is opening up so many questions and subjects. But one thing before we move on, is adaptation. So two points. One is that it's a great tool for pitching to TV, you know, because obviously everything's about IP these days, and you know you have to have something that has some, you know, ideally has some resonance already with the market, and ideally has already been written, so you don't have to worry about it doesn't spend years in development as a new entirely original series would. But the great thing about this is when you pitch a show to outlets, I presume, you can say, look how many viewers these titles have. And then just on another point, because obviously series, it's obviously all about episodes and mastering that craft. But I imagine the generations writing on Wattpad are kind of must be developing their own very unique episodic style, because they have to, you know, if you're just doing chapter by chapter by chapter, you want not maybe as crude as cliffhangers every time, but you want that. That's a new thing as well, right? Developing a sort of ongoing episodic need for more from the consumer, somehow developing that within your writing, which is not heard of before, because normally, even if something is a series, even if it's just one season of a 5-season series, it's still that season is complete. But this is not like that, right?
So really interesting there. I think it's definitely not like a book that way. You know, if you get a book published as a traditional author or even a comic, you know, there might be an arc to your comic, but you know you have 28 pages of a comic or 400 pages of a novel before you really have to leave, excuse me, a cliffhanger. Yes. Our writers on both platforms know that they can create suspense on a chapter by chapter basis, because there's that moment, sometimes a week before the next one comes out, sometimes a few days, that you want the audience engaging with each other. You want them to be like, what happens next? Oh, she should definitely go right. She shouldn't go left. She should open that door, not that door. Why? So it really is an episodic art form that is being created.
Yeah.
And so sure, the pacing is a little different than a TV show, but the ups and downs are there. So when we are developing TV, when we're bringing in the showrunners, the writers' rooms to adapt, they're already seeing the ups and downs in the stories. And then we get to focus on the ones that make good TV that are going to, tell the story on a screen, which is obviously different than telling a story on a page. And that's like the really beautiful mix of art and science here. We're using audience, we're using the data behind them to find stories, but we still need to understand these stories from a story theory standpoint, from a pacing standpoint. We work with phenomenal on-screen talent, behind the camera talent, above the line, below. And it is really a creative vision that comes starting with our creators on the platform, but ends with the faces that we see on the screen and the credits that follow them. So that mix of art and science is really important. But you talked about how we pitch these then to our partners around the world. And it's still that mix of art and science. I can tell you Tower of God has 6.2 billion views on the platform. That is a mind-blowing number of views. But when we go to tell that story on Crunchyroll, that was one we turned into an anime series and did exceptionally well on the platform. We have to start thinking about how that is going to translate directly to screen. And so we work with production partners, we work with writing partners to really bring that to fruition. So, but nevertheless, those numbers behind it are something that no one else can really show, because you can go buy IP off the shelf. You can find whatever the number one book in your country is today. You can option that and develop it, but it's not an active audience. You can't talk to them every day. They're not coming back asking for more every day. So we have this hidden advantage in our stories, and maybe not so hidden with 176 million people reading across Wattpad and WEBTOON every month, but we have that ability to work with the audience throughout the process, not just finding the story. But as we develop, we can understand, down to the paragraph level on Wattpad, because there are comments down at that level. Well, okay, they really love this paragraph. They didn't love that decision. It doesn't mean we have to follow it. It's not development by numbers, but at least, in that moment, that everyone who's listening to this has been with that writer's room who is just, should we go left or right? If there's like a little bit of insight we can give in that moment, maybe we keep the fandom on for the next 2 or 3 episodes. So it really is a unique way we're developing, using that mix of art and science, the data with great creative partners. But it is something that I think not many, if anyone else, can do at the scale that we can do now on the studio side. Okay.
Well, as we're a Berlin-based festival, how could you tell us a bit about? I understand you've got exciting projects going with Fremantle. Lots of Constantine and various others. How specifically is the sort of, what's the European market like in terms of content creators, and also in terms of partners for adaptions, whether Wattpad or WEBTOON?
Yeah, I mean, across Europe and European languages, Spanish is something we look at globally, obviously, and French, German, wherever they're spoken, but are incredibly important to both platforms, actually. On Wattpad, the Spanish language example is the second most written language on the platform. So we're always looking across those regions, not only for great content on our platform. I talked about A Través de Ventana or other massive Spanish hits like Boulevard, but we're always looking for partners from the creative side to work with us on those projects. So you talked about Fremantle, you talked about Constantine. We have great partnerships with, excuse me, Viacom International. We've worked with Mediaset and Lagardère in France. And all because, as we're finding local stories, we also want that local creative expertise, right? I'm not pretending sitting here. For those of you who don't know, Wattpad started in Toronto, so I spent some of my time here. Sitting in Toronto, I don't want to pretend to understand the German landscape and understand, not only the types of stories that are being told on screens and shelves, but try to be an expert in that. We're here to help influence that, of course, but with our partners, really help push storytelling in a new way and help gather that understanding of the market. And truthfully, with the millions and millions of stories that we have access to, our partners help us really find the ones that we should be producing and should be promoting at any given time. So we have, at any given time, are actually producing in about 10 different languages around the world. We have hit after hit in Indonesia. I think our latest one is Cool Boy versus Nerd Girl. We've had hits in Singapore, Philippines, all over Europe and continuing to grow. And part of that is just a really phenomenal partner network we've been able to put together over that time.
And with the Philippines and Singapore and Indonesia, are they for the global streamers, or are they for local channels, or have I kind of misunderstood or public?
No, in the early days, while it's been a little bit of mix of both. So we have some great partners with Video and Screenplay in Indonesia, which is a local streaming platform, but globally available. Okay. Same in Singapore. We work with MediaCorp there, but they have a global streaming platform themselves. And we do see global viewership of the content we're producing there. But I think some of our partnerships, and with all of our partners globally, we're always looking for the right home. And sometimes it is a local partner, and sometimes it's a global streamer. I'll go back to Através of Ventana. Great example. We produced that with Nostromos. They're based in Spain, but sold that to and sold that to Netflix globally, where it was a hit globally. It was in top 10, I think, in 90 plus countries around the world, across North America, across LATAM, across Europe, across Asia. So it is about still, and I think a lot of the people listening to this, you all know that stories have sometimes the right place to live. And we just have the advantage of being able to look both locally and globally at any given time.
And with that particular show, so was that from someone from Spain, or was it someone from Brazil who created it? And could you tell us a bit of, just as one example, let's hear about the creators' story, their journey, who they were, and then how that took off, and then how you found a partner for it. That'd be very interesting to know about.
Yeah, so our writer there is Ariana Godoy. She has been writing on Wattpad for years and years. She was writing on Wattpad before I started the company in 2013. Originally from Venezuela, lives in the US now, but has primarily written in Spanish language. And, she has a day job. Writing was a hobby for her, I think, when she started, something she was exceptionally passionate about. And I think one of the things we were able to do for her is show the path to the traditional industries and find kind of a more direct path. And to that point, we're the shepherds of that path, but she's the one who amassed hundreds of millions of reads of her story on the platform, millions of followers. And the focus of her, not only as a writer, but building that community, building that fandom. When we go and take her stories out in Spanish language markets, when we find Nostromos to develop it, it becomes very obvious that this is an important story to be told, that this is one that should not only be told on shelves, and you can go buy Através of Ventana in Spanish language. We actually print the English version of it ourselves in our internal publishing group. It's called the Wattpad WEBTOON book group, but under our W imprint, where we're publishing the English version, and it's become a hit in US and Canada. But absolutely, we were able to not only take the success she's had on the shelves, but bring it to screens. And we bring it to Netflix Spain through their Spanish language group, I should say. And quite quickly, we all realized this could be a global hit, that it's telling a story that that demographic wants to be told all over the world. We know that language is no longer a barrier to someone in another country falling in love with the story. And we really saw this woman who started writing stories because she had an idea for her first few chapter, being one of the most influential writers in Spanish language and truly around the world. And we've been really fortunate to work with Ariana. We've been fortunate. I mean, one of the most humbling parts of what we do is we work with these creators who, at times don't even know the power that they have. And so to be able to support them and, bring them to more fans all over the world is a really amazing part of what we get to do at the studio. Sure.
And, I also understand you've been involved in building the Batman universe, and you have, and you've worked alongside Marvel and DC, and then also you got this big new project with Jim Henson's company as well. Could you just maybe?
Absolutely.
Jim Henson one sounds particularly interesting.
Yeah, we'll cover a lot of ground. That's a good question. So, DC, Marvel, even Archie, the WEBTOON platform has been working with those companies to bring stories onto the platform. So, we developed with DC webtoon called The Wayne Family, which is kind of a different telling of what's going on in the mansion when it's not just about the crime fighting side of it. We just got nominated for an Eisner Award for it, actually, which is a big award in the comic world. And that's because, you know, those big brands and more brands we're working with to bring onto the platform to create that webtoon version, see this is a medium that's important. It's a new fandom that they're not reaching.
I was just going to say that, rejuvenating that franchise, which is so like powerful. It's like the perfect means to build on it again with some genuine originality rather than just, you know.
Absolutely. They can tell stories in different ways, and they're reaching fans that may not be going to the comic store to pick up the latest edition of it. So we've seen huge success, a vast amount of readership on the platforms there.
Sure.
If we switch over to the Jim Henson side, that's actually on the adaptation. That's taking things off platform. So we are developing Lore Olympus, which, you know, I talked about earlier, is one of the largest stories on the platform, about 1.2 billion views. It is created by a woman named Rachel Smythe from New Zealand, a beautiful, unbelievable retelling of Hades and Persephone in a way that I don't think we've seen before, with an artistic style that has definitely never been seen before. But yeah, to be able to collaborate with the brilliant creative minds at Jim Henson and how we're going to bring that to screens everywhere is a really phenomenal process. But it speaks to what our creators can bring, and to have something like the Jim Henson Company interested in our storytelling just gives more weight. And I hope a lot of affirmation for Rachel to the power that our creators can bring to storytelling globally.
Sure. Okay. And so, I mean, it already seems like you're so saturated in audiences' minds and worlds. Where's the future? I mean, it's where is that?
Love to pontificate on that. So I think we're just getting started, right? You know, I think before the merger of the two studios, so, you know, as Wattpad got acquired last year by Naver and Webtoon, you know, both Webtoon and Wattpad had a studio going. So Wattpad Studios, you know, had been in existence for about 4.5, 5 years. Webtoon Studios about 2 years. Bringing them together meant that we can do more and more quickly. On top of that, you know, our parent company Naver announced $100 million of funding for the studio, which allowed us to invest even faster in our content. So that doesn't mean we're doing it all ourselves. We're still looking for great partners to produce with, co-finance with, whatever it means to bring high quality content to screens more quickly. We're always looking for those partners. I think to that point, we're getting started. You know, I referenced the industry going and trying to buy the last 100 years of IP, and, you know, the Warner Discovery merger and the Amazon buying MGM, they're all looking for what happened in the last 100 years and to recreate it. And we have 100+ stories in development right now, but that is only going to grow as we look to capture the next 100 years of IP. That stories that, while you may not be familiar with today, you'll be very familiar with. They'll be some of the biggest storytelling in the world over the next few years. So I think the future is looking really bright for what we're doing. And it's all based on this currency between creator and audience, right? And if you look at what's going on at the streamers right now, audience has never been more important. It's no longer just about eyeballs, it's about engagement. And our IP has that. It's built into it. Our creators know how to create burgeoning fandoms that turn into some of the biggest fandoms in the world. And we're here as a studio to kind of support that and find ways that we can bring that fandom more to the universe they love, and then bring in new fans that maybe had never heard of it and went to the box office and saw After for the first time, or turned on Crunchyroll and saw God of High School for the first time. Just brings them back to the platform, as we talked about at the beginning, introduces them to a Webtoon format that they had never heard of before. So it's a really beautiful ecosystem we get to work in, and we just see the ability to fill screens and shelves for the next 100 years right on the horizon.
So you're not concerned by the like Netflix's big share hit, and you know, the post-pandemic, you know, there's this huge boom of streamers entering the market, and you're not concerned by the much talked about, I don't know how severe it will be in the long term, but the current struggles of some of the big streamers, and the fact that people are getting a bit nervous about, did we really need a streaming channel? Would we have been better as just a studio? Do you feel that you're in a good position to navigate this kind of new landscape, post-pandemic landscape?
Yeah, I do think we're in an excellent place for that. And it goes back to that currency of the entertainment market shifting from an eyeball or just user growth to user engagement. And we saw that, we're seeing that throughout the industry, whether it's through what's going on Netflix to actually the opposite going on at Disney. We're seeing this need for not just one-time viewers, but continuous viewership. And when you look at the stories we have on our platforms in languages all over the world, some stories that have 1,400 episodes, or millions of words of text, we have the ability to tell stories with built-in fandoms. Excuse me. We have the ability to tell stories with built-in fandoms that we can talk to every day, that our creators know what they love and know what they didn't love. And in that mix of art and science, taking the data behind our audience and mixing that with brilliant creative concepts, brilliant creative partners, screenwriters, on-screen talent, I think we're exactly what can help the industry shift from, oh my goodness, I hope this is a good show, I hope it works, to, okay, let's build fandom. Because I think fandom is that future. It's what keeps people coming back. I always say fandom's a condition, right? If something you love, if you're in love with a series, whether it's book, TV, a film franchise, and that film franchise ends, you will find something else to go be a fan of. We are giving runways for fandoms to continue to grow around our creators for years and years to come. So look, there is a shift in any industry as it's growing and shifting, going from phase 1 to phase 2. But I don't think any of us doubt that streamers are here to stay. And I think we really can fuel a lot of that growth for them in the years to come.
Okay, and how would you differentiate what people mean by IP and fandom? To me, you could, let's say, a classic English literature book like Emily Bronte, Wuthering Heights. That's kind of effectively, that's what we're talking about, right? It's been remade lots of times. It's got this effectively fandom. Everyone loves it. Or are you talking about genuine, like always building social media worlds around your actual content, or would you say we're in a phase where the two are indistinguishable, or is it all of the above sort of thing?
Well, I would say IP and fandom are very different, but I think I agree with you. In fact, Anna Todd would definitely agree with you, the writer of After, because she loves Wuthering Heights, but she would definitely agree, but that's a fandom based around it. And I don't think fandom is a single path anymore. Like your fandom might just be reading something as soon as it comes out. Other people's fandom is creating fan art. Other people are writing fan fiction on their favorite things. Fandom is it's a verb, right? It's an active moment. IP is some words on a page. So that's what I said, when you can buy the biggest thing, if you go to the bookstore and you option the bestseller in your country right now, there's no proof that fandom or the people reading that IP got past page 60.
Okay.
I mean, how many people finished it? How many people talked about it with friends? How many people suggested to other people? A fandom is a group of engaged humans who are talking about something constantly. And I think that's what can really set apart our stories, is we can watch fandom in real time. We can watch how many people are rereading it, who they're sharing it with, what they're commenting on, and what they aren't. And it's that view, that understanding of the ones and zeros behind the audience that we have uniquely, that I think lets us see that really huge difference between IP and fandom.
Okay.
It doesn't mean there can't be fandoms around anything, but definitely just a piece of IP is just words on a page that have previously been written, or a comic that has previously been drawn. Active fandom and that moment of love and emotion behind a story, that's what's going to really power the next 100 years of entertainment.
Okay. And so just to wrap this conversation up, Aron, I was just wondering, so how did you get into this world? Because I understand you had a background as an engineer, and I just wondered how that path led to, just to finish off the conversation, if you could just tell us a bit about your own story. It'd be super interesting.
Absolutely. Leaving the big twist at the end, right? I was an engineer. Don't let it get past the group of people watching this. But I was always a storyteller growing up. Whether, I was a big theater person growing up. I was a musician growing up, and then realized I was slightly better at Lego than those two things. So I went on to become an engineer. But it's really given me a unique view. And when I left school and started down, kind of the startup road again and again, they all kind of had something similar to it, which is like a mix of tech and entertainment, back to that mix of art and science. And so whether I have been, working in the gaming world, the music world, the book world, the film, TV world, it's always had some skew of technology to it. And I think it's been able to allow me to mix the ones and zeros with a creative product. And looking at the world going forward, streamers, data-driven, even book platforms, the Amazons and Kobos of the world being data-driven, it's actually given me a bit of a unique view that you can mix those two things, that, numbers are not the enemy of creative and creative is not the enemy of numbers, but the future will really be mixing those to still tell great story. Like we can't just take the biggest thing on either platform and give it to an actor to read out on a camera and hope that that's going to, have millions of hours of viewing time on a streaming platform. There's a lot of creative process that goes into this. And I think my background has let me kind of bridge those two worlds. And not to bore your viewers, but if you want me to go into how we use linear regression to find new stories, but I can also talk about the points and breadths that we need to add when we're creating a script. And I think that kind of unique background has gotten me into this world and keeps me going.
I think that actually would be fascinating to talk about, but perhaps for another day. But
definitely a different kind of talk.
Yeah, but it'd be super interesting. But I don't want to take up any more of your time. I know you've got a busy day, so I just want to say thanks a lot for that, Aron. That was absolutely fascinating, and hope to talk to you again in the future.
Awesome. Well, thanks for having me, Nick, and thanks everyone for listening.